Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, November 12th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about just all the tiebreaker scenarios that could go down in all of the conferences. We'll break them down and try to give you a better idea of what the CFP could look like at the end of the day. Then we'll get to the winners and the losers from Week 11. Definitely a ton that were left off the list, but I like the 8 that I got. We'll break those down here in a second. Then we'll get into a Week 11 whip around, all the games we just didn't have a chance to get to, and we'll get to one that's coming up tonight in the MAC that is an absolutely huge one for that conference. Then we'll get into the superlatives for Week 11, definitely some big ones. The biggest win of the weekend might just go to the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, and a ton more that I want to break down for you guys. And then we'll get into my top 15 Tuesday. We'll get into my top 15 teams as we head into Week 12. Definitely quite a bit of a mix-up after this crazy last week. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat, that bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. I can respond to it. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible as we head down the home stretch here, and this first segment's going to get a little bit confusing, so any questions you have, definitely utilize that. But let's go ahead and jump into this, because we got a lot of things to figure out. With only three games, but 4 weeks left in the season, we're going to have to figure out just where everyone sits, and it's going to be really, really interesting watching it all break down. And I think it's one of those things that we might just have to wait until the last week of the season, but I'm going to give you a relatively good idea of where everything sits and how everything will work out. First of all, want to send my deepest thanks to MRed. It was someone on Reddit, I believe, that put together a tiebreaker scenario, a tiebreaker generator, where you pick all the remaining games and it spits out what seems to be the right way that it would break down. It sounds like ESPN, Fox, and a ton of other people have taken notice of this and have said that he's doing it right. So really appreciate that, and that's what we're going to be using for this. Gave me a really good breakdown of everything. But in the SEC, this is going to be one of the conferences that is hardest to figure out for the CFP at the very least. It is going to be an absolute nightmare to try to figure out all of the craziness around this, and it's definitely going to be one of the more interesting conferences when it comes to the CFP at the end of the year. For the conference title, it's a little bit more simple. It's a little bit simpler. Now, it could get absolutely crazy, but let's just say if Tennessee wins this weekend, that makes it the easiest that it could possibly be, because it makes it much, much more likely that they just play the winner of the Texas A&M game. Obviously, if one of those teams loses, then things get a little bit more complicated again. But if Tennessee were to win, if A&M and Texas were to win up until that game, the winner of that game would play Tennessee. And obviously, if Tennessee didn't fall the rest of the way, kind of using, just using as the starters are going to win most, or the favorites are going to win most of these games in these scenarios. So just keep that in mind throughout this. But if Georgia were to win this weekend, unless A&M loses to Auburn or Texas, unless A&M loses to Auburn or Texas loses to Kentucky, the winner of the title game would yes, I apologize. If Georgia wins this weekend, I can say pretty confidently the winner of the Texas A&M game is in the playoff. The loser is out of the playoff. I feel pretty good saying that. I don't think that's even up for debate, if I'm being totally honest. I do think that the loser will be out, the winner will be in if Georgia were to win this weekend and everything else were to happen the way that we expect it. And the weird part is Missouri has a weird amount of power. I do not expect them to get to the CFP by any means, but if they were to win out, they likely will not be in the SEC title, but they would keep LSU out. If they were to win out, go 10-2, LSU would not get a bid into the championship. If LSU were to win out and Missouri were to lose one or two the rest of the way, lose to South Carolina this weekend and possibly Arkansas or Mississippi State, then LSU could go to Atlanta, and LSU would still have a path to the CFP if they were able to win that game in Atlanta. So Missouri, although I don't expect them to be in the CFP or to be in the SEC title game, they have a weird amount of power to decide, is it Alabama that goes or is it LSU that goes? Because of the opponent winning percentage, it would change quite a bit for those two teams if Missouri went one way or the other. So definitely something to watch there. LSU still has the very slimmest of paths to the CFP, but for the CFP, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. You have four teams that are minus odds right now, and those are the four teams, or not those four teams, excuse me. The cleanest way for this to go down, if I'm being totally honest, is Tennessee wins this weekend. They win out. And then possibly Texas wins over A&M. And then you would have two 11-1 teams, Texas and Tennessee. You'd have two 10-2 teams in the SEC, Ole Miss and Alabama. Those would be your four teams. That would be pretty easy, and then you'd pick four from the Big Ten. You'd figure out what the rest holds. But if there was a little bit of an issue and Tennessee were to lose this weekend, then you have the door open for possibly five teams, which is going to be really, really interesting to watch. I think Texas, although they have the best odds right now by a pretty comfortable margin, I think if they lose one more game, they're out. I'll be totally honest. I don't think that schedule's near tough enough for them to be able to hold on to that for as long as they want. So I think even if they lose to A&M at the end of the year, Texas will not be in, and then someone else will take that spot. But as of right now, I'm pretty comfortably betting there will be at least four SEC teams in there. I think there's a world where there is five. If Tennessee wins this weekend, that probably knocks that down quite a bit, but definitely something to watch as we get on the rest of the season. LSU's still technically in it. I have a feeling I missed Tennessee in here. There's a chance, there's almost definitely I missed Tennessee in here. I'll be totally honest, because there's no way Tennessee is not on this list. But another team to watch, obviously, if they win this weekend, then they're almost definitely in the CFP, and they very well could be in Atlanta at the end of the year. So the SEC is okay. If Tennessee wins this weekend, it'll be a lot more digestible. If they lose, then we'll deal with that craziness when it comes. But 4 or 5 teams seems to be where the SEC is going to land at the end of this thing. And then you got the Big Ten, a lot more straightforward, which makes things a lot easier. Barring any craziness around Ohio or around Oregon the rest of the way, the winner of the Indiana-Ohio State game is going to play them in the title game. Pretty much plain and simple. Nothing's going to change unless Oregon totally falls off a cliff and loses the next 2 games, because they can afford to lose one and still find their way into the championship game. And then if Ohio State wins, it will be them. If Indiana wins, it will be them. If Oregon loses to Wisconsin but beats Washington, they'll be totally fine. They'll still be there. Now, Penn State is unlikely to make it happen. They would need a little bit of help from Michigan at the end of the year for Ohio State, because say Ohio State beats Indiana but then loses to Michigan, then Penn State would be the team that goes. So Penn State still has a path to get to the championship game, but definitely not the team that is in the best spot. And Indiana's probably not going to the title game, almost definitely not going to the title game if they lose to Ohio State. No doubt about that. Their common opponent win percentage would not be nearly as good as the other 3 teams. They would be out. And then for the CFP, you're just going to have to figure out where Indiana stands at the end of this. That is the one big variable in this thing. I think if Ohio State loses to Indiana, they're probably still in, if I'm being totally honest, even at 10-2. I think Indiana, if they lose to Ohio State by 14 or more, things get a little bit interesting. If them at 11-1 and then maybe a 10-2 Tennessee or a 10-2 Ole Miss or a 10-2 Alabama, we're having a very interesting conversation. And frankly, I don't think we should be, but that's a rant that I can go on another time. I think Indiana should absolutely be in 11-1, but I understand the arguments against it, and I have to imagine there will be a ton of people in that room that have that argument. But moving forward to the Big 12, because the Big 10 was a little bit more digestible for us all, but the Big 12 becoming a little bit more digestible. You absolutely love to see it. It's one of those conferences that has been so hard to pin down the entire year. Now we're starting to pin it down. BYU, you can afford another loss, plain and period. You can lose one of the next games against one of the teams coming up. I believe they play Kansas this weekend. They can lose that game, still be in the Big 12 championship. No doubt about that, no issue there. The thing comes when Colorado, if they do not win out, things get a little bit interesting. If they lose this game this weekend, let's say to Utah, or a weekend after that to Kansas, let's say they lose one of those games, the winner of the Iowa State-Kansas State game would go to the championship, barring any disaster before that. If Iowa State was to lose, if Kansas State was to lose before that game, then things obviously get shaken up again. But let's just say they win out the rest of the way. They meet at the end of the year. The winner of that game would go over Colorado. So Colorado's still got to be very careful. And then there is a chaos scenario. Arizona State is still in the hunt here. Arizona State is still very much in the hunt, and also is West Virginia, and we'll get to that here in a second. But if Arizona State wins out, they would beat KSU, they would beat BYU, and as long as Colorado lost one more and KSU beat Iowa State, they would make the Big 12 title. I know that sounds a little bit crazy and a little bit far-fetched. This West Virginia one's actually a little bit more down-to-earth than anything else. If Colorado loses one more and West Virginia wins out, they're in. They play enough of these teams the rest of the way on top of them to knock them out of the way and get up to the top. I don't expect that to happen. I don't expect Arizona State to be in this thing. But I do think it is interesting to watch, and definitely one of those things that will be fascinating for the CFP. It's going to be whoever wins this conference. I'm having a hard time seeing multiple teams from this conference getting in, barring any disaster around Notre Dame or around the SEC or around the Big Ten. I do think it's going to be one team. I hate to say it because I think a 12-1 BYU probably would have earned their slot, but at the end of the day, with all of the craziness going on around them, it's probably just whoever wins this thing. So Colorado is the favorite to win it right now. BYU right behind them. We'll see what happens with Kansas State and Iowa State. Literally, their odds are the rest of the way, really. The odds are the exact same for making the CFP and winning their championship. So Kansas State, Iowa State, Arizona State, and and West Virginia have no shot to make it if they don't win the championship. Colorado and BYU technically still have a very slim shot if they don't, but I don't expect it from either of them. So whoever wins it is going to be in a really good place. Obviously, BYU and Colorado are in the driver's seat right now, but Kansas State and Iowa State, that can change in a hurry if Colorado were to drop one of the games here coming up. But moving forward to the ACC, this one, let's just start with the elephant in the room. If if Miami were to win out and Clemson were to win out, Miami goes. No doubt about that. That's the tiebreaker. Miami would win out that way. They would go to the championship game. So Miami, you got one for free. You got a loss for free. Now you got to move forward, win the rest of the way, and you will be more than fine. Clemson, they're going to need another loss somewhere. I think if SMU were to lose and they were to beat Pitt, then they would be in a good position to possibly jump over them because of the common opponents, but definitely something to watch. SMU has a pretty comfortable path the rest of the way, so I'm not necessarily expecting that to happen. They're probably going to need another loss from Miami and then be able to beat Pitt this upcoming weekend. Pitt can make the title game if Miami falls once more and they win out, because they would not have played either of those two teams, and they would be in a position where SMU would be the only team that they have played among that group. So they would be in a pretty good position. I think Louisville's still alive in some very technical circumstances. If Pitt were to beat Clemson and then lose to Louisville, Louisville will be alive. So there's still a lot of craziness there, but I'm pretty much going to cut it at those top three teams. I think it's pretty unlikely that anyone else really gets into the hunt. So who would make the CFP? It's the winner of the conference. Again, I can't imagine it's going to be any different. Miami, if they win out the rest of the way, they'll be 12-1. SMU will be 11-2. They're not getting into 11-2. If Miami loses, they'll be 11-2. They're not getting in at 11-2. I'm just being totally honest. So as of right now, this is the path forward for the ACC. Whoever wins it is likely in. The Big 12 and the ACC are probably one-bid conferences. As kind of frustrating as that might be for a lot of people, that's probably the case, and we'll get into that throughout the next couple of weeks and see if that changes a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit more opening than I'm thinking right now, but with Notre Dame in the picture, it makes things a little bit sketchy for those two. But going to the group of five, it's still Boise State leading the way. It's still Army right there. Louisiana finding their way into the hunt. Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State's odds went way down this past weekend, so maybe there's a little bit of an opening there. Who knows? But as of right now, the only way that they get two in is if Notre Dame falls out, and then it's a 13-0 Army. Or Notre Dame would fall out in that scenario, to be fair, but a 13-0 Army and a 12-1 Boise State. That's the only reality. I'd be surprised if it's more than one team. I do think it's going to be one team. I think a 13-1 Army obviously would take the cake. I think it would be 12-1 Boise State right after that, and I think it would go back to the American champion. I can't be positive about that, but if Tulane were to win the rest of the way, I think they would get in even at 11-2. So a lot of things to happen here. Definitely a lot of teams that are still in it, and it'll be fascinating to watch, but basically, Army wins out, they're in. Boise State wins out, and Army loses to Notre Dame, they're in. Pretty much that's as simple as I can make it for the group of five. And for these tiebreakers, they're starting to make a little bit of sense. They're still pretty confusing, and particularly in the SEC, we'll have to figure that out over the next coming weeks. But definitely was a little bit easier to break it down with MRed's generator, so really appreciate that. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we'll break down the winners and the losers from this past weekend. Definitely a lot of winners, including, feels like Bama football is just back to being Bama football. But I'll break down exactly what I mean right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the tiebreaker scenarios. I hope it was not too confusing. I hope I made it a little bit digestible. We will get into that tomorrow, or next week, after the UGA Tennessee game and after the Clemson Pitt game. That will give us a lot more answers. It will be a lot more clear after this weekend. But let's get into the winners and the losers of Week 11 because there were quite a few of them. Frankly, I left a couple off that I figured out a little bit later in the day, but at the end of the day, I like my 8, and we'll jump into this real quickly. So, obviously, it was a huge weekend. A couple of upsets, a couple of big-time performances from teams that really needed it, and we'll start with that. Bama football is back. The way that I grew up knowing Bama football, it feels like it is back in Tuscaloosa because that is who they are right now. They are going to run the ball. They're going to play with toughness. They're going to play with a defense that absolutely flies around, and they're just going to beat you into submission. That's the way that they're going to play football games really the rest of the way, and they have one of the best battering rams in the entire sport in Jalen Milroe. He is an absolute monster. Him going downhill might be the most terrifying thing in all of the sport. He is so good when he is out in open field, when he can make plays with his legs. Obviously, the question still remains, can he do that over the next, 4, 5, 6 games possibly as they try to win a national title? But man, on Saturday, he was rolling. It was absolutely incredible to watch. They had 271 rushing against Missouri, 311 against LSU. Obviously not the two most stout defensive lines in the country, but definitely two groups that could stop you if they wanted to, and they were really not able to. So it's a really good position for Alabama to be in the rest of the way, and that's the formula. If they follow it every single week, if they're able to get it going, and really, they won't have to follow it this weekend against Mercer. They might not have to follow it against Oklahoma or Auburn to get those wins. You really just got to follow it in the playoff and maybe in the SEC title. So it's going to be awesome to watch this, and really, as you can see, if that's the approach that they're going with, to one of the most lethal offenses in the entire country. The loser was the SEC and the Big Ten haters because I think the last chance for the Big Ten, for the Big 12 and the ACC to get more than one team in probably died this weekend, and it's really the Miami loss that did them in. It felt like Miami was the team that if they went 12-0, lost to SMU in a tight game, a 12-1 Miami, I think still would have snuck into the field. And 11-2 Miami's not, and 11-2 SMU is not, and now BYU, the way they struggled this past weekend, I'm not confident the 12-1 BYU would get in. As crazy as that sounds, I don't necessarily think they would. So now you're in a position where even Ole Miss losing or beating Georgia in the SEC makes things a lot more complicated. You could finish with 6 10-2 teams, and the only one in that group that I could say very confidently would be out at 10-2 is probably Texas. And as we know, that logo means something. So it could be that Texas isn't out at 10-2, even though I very much think they should be. It'll be really interesting to watch. There's a world where you get 5 SEC teams in, and with the way that the Big 12 and the ACC are kind of proving themselves down the stretch, not necessarily going all that great. Now, the variable is still Notre Dame. Now, the issue with that is, could the variable be Notre Dame of getting another SEC or getting another Big 12 or getting another ACC team in there? Or could it be getting another 10-2 SEC team in there? So that's the issue that you're running up against with the ACC and the Big 12. I would be surprised if they had more than 2 teams collectively, if I'm being totally honest. So tough week for them, and Miami was really the last hope for this, and them going down puts that entire, I don't want to say totally to bed, but in a really, really bad place going forward. The winner, this should be the loser. I very much apologize. I had one more loser where I shouldn't have, but Georgia's usual strength is not their strength this year. Maybe the winner is everyone that hates Georgia. Let's just roll with that for the time being, because the reality is this is not a usual Georgia team under Kirby Smart right now. They are not able to rely on the run. They do not impose their will at the line of scrimmage. They make a lot of unforced errors like fumbles and drops and turnovers that kill drives. It's just not a team that's as mentally tough as they usually are. Now, there's a lot of issues from scheme to quarterback play to offensive line play to running back to wide. There's a million problems with this team. But a lot of it is just the toughness of this team, I'm finding. When they go on the road, it is not the same team that used to go on the road for Kirby Smart. When they run the ball down the middle of the field, it's not the same team that's running the ball down the middle of the field. And the issue is you have a Tennessee D-line coming up that's probably the best in the entire country. You might have just faced one that is number 2 or number 3. Tennessee might be number 1. And if your O-line cannot hold up, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I know I said winner. This is definitely a loser. Georgia's usual strength is not their usual strength right now. So apologies for that. But I realize now what I did. I flipped these two. Ole Miss boosters are the big-time winners. I realize what I did there. Apologies for that. But ignore that top part. The Ole Miss boosters, huge winners. Because you look at this weekend, it was confirmation that all of the checks you wrote, all the investments you made this offseason were totally worth it. You watched as all of the I don't want to put it this way because they're players, they're people. The assets that you put your money into really played well this past Saturday. You had Walter Nolan was all over the place. He was an absolute dominating force in the middle of that defense. Juice Wells scored a touchdown. Chris Paul Jr. was incredible. He absolutely flew around the field and jumped off the page for me on Saturday. He was remarkable. This entire team, you got what you wanted. You got what you needed, and you're in a place now where all the work is still ahead of you, obviously. You got to win at Florida after the bye week. You got to beat Mississippi State. You're in the playoff if you do that. There's no two ways about that. You are absolutely in the playoff if you do that. And once you get there, they're the team that fits the mold of what a team, let's say a Cinderella quote unquote team could be in that CFP race. Elite front seven, explosive offense, experienced quarterback. I think those are the three things you're probably going to need to win a title, and Ole Miss has all of them. So it could be really interesting to watch them if they can find their way into that dance. The winner is Indiana football's future, and this one is a little bit more complicated because they didn't play their best football this past weekend by any means, but it's really just about the optics of the situation. You had Indiana, a team that a lot of these recruits, a lot of these kids, me myself, did not think much of Indiana football when I was growing up. I thought the world of Michigan football when I was growing up, at least when they weren't playing Ohio State. But I do think they were in a position where this was a game where Michigan's down. I fully understand that. It doesn't change that they are one of the benchmark teams in that conference. In the SEC, it's LSU, it's Bama, it's Georgia. Those are the teams that if you beat them, congratulations. You made your next step into the top echelon of the SEC. For the Big Ten, it's Ohio State, it's Michigan, it's Penn State. I understand Michigan's down. I understand Oregon's kind of taken their place just a little bit there. But it is the optics of the situation. It is saying, you're playing a Michigan team. All the recruits that are watching this just saw Indiana beat Michigan. Regardless of what this Michigan team is, regardless of the situation around these two teams, they just watched an Indiana helmet top a Michigan helmet, and that does matter. I'm not saying that it's totally going to change. Indiana's going to be a top 10 recruiter, and they're going to move forward and totally jump Michigan the rest of the way. I'm just saying this is a benchmark, and it was one that they've been looking for really all year with the schedule that they've played, a huge one, but frankly, it's going to pale in comparison if they can go up to Columbus and beat Ohio State in a couple of weeks. I can promise you that. The loser is Florida fans. It's got to be a tough weekend for you guys, and it had to have been a tough week overall, and it's nothing against Billy Napier in this. I do think Billy Napier is a good coach. I do think keeping him is not the worst decision in the world, so I'm not trying to attack him in any way in this. All this to say, you just re-signed the guy, essentially. You just said he's coming back for 2025. He didn't outright say that, but a lot of people behind the scenes are saying that. So he's back for 2025. You're putting all the energy into getting a better roster, into going into the portal, into doing all that stuff. And then you go out on the field and get absolutely railroaded by the new SEC team. That has got to hurt. You're on a coach that is in his third year. You feel like you should have a better footing in this conference than Texas does, and you just don't. They have the better roster, they have the better coaches, they have the better players, and they're finishing better. So you're in a really bad spot. Now, here's the good news is the injuries were outright ridiculous in this game, especially on the offensive side of the ball for Florida. And when you're facing one of the best defenses in the country, it's going to be a tall task to get much of anything going. So the offense, I'll leave that by the wayside for the time being. The defense getting beaten up does suck, but you're going to get some staff changes there soon. So I know this weekend stunk. I know this week probably stunk for a lot of Florida fans out there. I promise you it'll be okay. I promise you that you guys will bounce back. I can't promise you're going to go 10-2 next year. I can promise it's going to be a little bit better than this year. I can't promise how much better and if you're going to want Billy Napier at the end of next year, but I can promise it's going to get a little bit better than especially it was this past week. But the winner is the Chaos Lovers, particularly at the SEC Chaos Lovers, because everything got a little bit crazy this past weekend in the SEC with Ole Miss beating Georgia and really Alabama beating LSU, because LSU still has the weirdest path in the world back to the SEC title. That's still one. Like, it gives a little bit of chaos down the stretch of this season. So a lot of stuff happening. Miami obviously losing in the ACC opens another door, but there's so many things that can happen the rest of the way. I think Indiana struggling puts them in a position where maybe an 11-1 Indiana's left out. So there's plenty of stuff that is still to be worked out, and it sounds crazy to say that this late in the season, but the 12-team playoff, that's what we signed up for, and I'm absolutely loving it along the way. I used to be someone that was firmly against the 12-team, and I still am in certain respects, but I'm having a lot of fun. I'll be totally honest with you guys. So it's been really, really awesome, and I think this weekend we'll do a lot to answer some questions. Probably won't do everything, so we'll have to figure out what happens the rest of the way, but the biggest loser to me was the newly minted one-loss teams. There were a couple of teams that had their season take a really tough hit last week, then they got right back up on that horse and got a knockout punch pretty much. So very, very tough week. We'll start with Pitt. They lost to Virginia this past weekend. Second straight loss puts them from undefeated and in the CFP to now 7-2 and staring down a game against Clemson. Really, really tough. In a matter of 8 days, everything kind of fell apart over there. So they're in a really tough position. And if they can beat Clemson, things get right back on track. And then you're just waiting for Miami to misstep and then possibly get your season back. But at the end of the day, a really, really tough turn of events where if they won this weekend, then maybe them and Clemson was the face-off for the ACC title. But they lose, and now they're in a really, really tough spot regardless of if they win or lose this weekend. And then Iowa State's another one. They're coming off a loss from Texas Tech. Immediately fall to Kansas. Now they need a little bit of help from Colorado to get back into the Big 12 championship. Not quite as much help as Pitt needs, but definitely is in a position where if Colorado loses and they win out, they're still very much in the hunt. If they misstep at any point or Colorado doesn't, they're officially out of the Big 12 championship, when 2 weeks ago it felt like them and BYU were kind of on a collision course in that conference. So it was a crazy weekend. There is a ton of more losers. I mean, the refs in the BYU-Utah game, after the game getting berated by the Utah AD, which was rather aggressive. I'll leave it at that for the time being. I think it might have been a little bit too over the top, but at the end of the day, I understand the passion around that game, so I'm not going to fault him too much. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we just got a couple more games that I want to break down for you guys. UCLA's win streak continues on. West Virginia stays alive technically in the Big 12, and then we got a huge one in the MAC coming up tonight, so I want to break that down for you guys right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers from this past weekend. Big time losers were those Florida fans that had to know that that was their coach going forward, and then have that performance was very, very tough. I don't think it's going to be quite that bad going forward, but that was definitely a tough Saturday. No two ways about that. But let's get into some different Week 11 games that we just hadn't had a chance to get to throughout this week. And I want to start with this UCLA team. They deserve so much respect. It's one of those teams that, obviously, it was very easy to write them off, and I don't blame you if you have not been watching UCLA over the last couple of weeks, but you look back at their losses early on in this season. Indiana, LSU, Oregon, Penn State, and Minnesota. Minnesota's the only one you could convince me is an outright bad loss. They lost by 4 points. They played pretty good football. They just came up a little bit short in that game. This is a good team. It's a team that Deshaun Foster took over one of probably the least talented team in the entire conference, barring maybe Northwestern and a couple other teams out there. But the reality was, this was not a team that was supposed to win 3 games in this conference this year. This was not a team that was even supposed to win 2. If they won 1, that was going to be a huge win and they were going to move on forward. Now they've been able to beat a team that has been a perennial, at least solid team, at least tier 2 team in this conference. Caleb Johnson was held to only 49 yards and 18 carries. They didn't get anything from the pass game. He got 2 interceptions in that one. For UCLA, Ethan Garbers didn't even have his best day, but TJ Harden had 125 yards rushing. And Garbers made the throws that he needed to in the game-winning drive for the Bruins, so could not be more impressed with Deshaun Foster and this staff. It was a lot of noise around this program. It was a lot of people talking about how they're the odd man out of the teams going into the Big Ten and they're going to just be totally at the bottom, and they are at the bottom. I'm not necessarily arguing that, but this is a team that's playing much better football than I thought they would this time this season, and maybe they just finish it out and continue to play good football and sneak into a 5-win, maybe even a bowl game berth. I know that sounds crazy right now, but this is a team that's playing really good football, and if you can beat Iowa this way, you can do a lot of things in the Big Ten. But staying in the Big Ten, the Rutgers got one of the weirder wins of the weekend, frankly, with all of the injuries that was going on, with all the craziness around that, and with Minnesota rolling downhill the way that they were. This is a remarkable win, and it was Ethan Kaliak-Manis that really got them going. 17 for 33, not the greatest completion percentage, but 240 yards, 3 scores. The run defense was absolutely incredible. Darius Taylor for Minnesota only had 28 yards in this game, and Minnesota as a whole had 38 yards on 19 carries. So Rutgers did their job up front, that is for sure, and it put a lot on Max Brosmer in this passing offense, and just wasn't quite what they wanted to. So this win this loss, I guess, officially knocks Minnesota out of any chance in the Big Ten. Obviously, they probably weren't going to make a run, but you never know. And then Rutgers is just a win they badly needed. They have Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State the rest of the way. If they can get to 8 wins, this is a huge year for Rutgers, especially with all of the injuries. Really remarkable bounce back for Greg Schiano and the boys after a really tough stretch this past little bit. Moving over to the ACC, another team that was still hypothetically, mathematically alive was Syracuse before this past weekend. Now, Boston College just totally took over in this game, and Thomas Castellanos actually even left this game, and Grayson James came in, and they were able to get it done. But the run game was the story. Kai Robichaud had 28 carries, 198 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jordan McDonald, 15 carries, 133 yards, and a score. They were incredible. They totally controlled the line of scrimmage. They totally controlled this game and were able to do just enough late to win this one. And Boston College did a great job just responding. Every time that Syracuse got a score, every time they got a little bit close, Boston College was up 9 after a crazy safety that they got, but Syracuse responded with a touchdown to go down 2. Boston College came right back down with a touchdown. So it was one of those things where Syracuse felt like they were kind of chasing the carrot that it just kept running away from them. It was really incredible to watch, and Boston College continues to just be the team that is really tough to beat. They're just really tough to put down. Whether or not you beat them or not is up for debate, but they're a team that can beat you in a number of different ways, and they're just really, really tough. You're never going to get them to quit, that's for sure. But moving on to the Big 12, a team that has stayed alive somehow in the Big 12 is West Virginia after this win this weekend, and Neil Brown needed this win very, very badly. The finish to this season was probably going to decide his future at Morgantown, and it's off to a very, very good start, but it was a very weird game. West Virginia got outgained by almost 200 yards. They were worse on third down. They had 15 less first downs, but they won the turnover battle 3-1, and that was it. That was the entirety of the game. Brendan Sorsby made a number of mistakes that I just can't wrap my head around. But at the end of the day, West Virginia was able to get the win, and West Virginia has Baylor, UCF, Texas Tech the rest of the way. So getting to 7 wins is not crazy at all. If they can beat Texas Tech, then they'll get to 8 wins. So they'll be in a really, really good spot, and I think it will get Neil Brown another year if they're able to execute that. If they lose the next 2 games, then he's probably in a really tough spot. But him and Nico Miracle coming back for the next year, I think it could be a really, really fun team in that conference. But we'll see what happens the rest of the way. Just a very, very good start for Neil Brown to at least keep his job over there in Morgantown. Then you got Oklahoma State TCU. We got to study this Oklahoma State team. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how a team that had that much returning production, had that good of an offensive line, had the best running back in the country coming back this year, just fell flat. They still have not won a conference game. They are starting to get more and more blown out every single day. I mean, Ollie Gordon had 25 carries, 121 yards, and a touchdown in this game, and they still scored 13 points. I don't know how this is even possible. I don't know what happened with this game. I mean, Alan Bowman left and the backup did come in. They turned over the ball 3 times and a turnover on downs. This team just does an incredible job of shooting themselves in the foot. They do an incredible job of handing games to other teams, and they've done it a number of times this year. They probably should be at least a 3-win team, at least a 4-win team in that conference, because you look at a couple of the games they lost, they had no business losing them. But at the end of the day, this is where they are, and a huge win for TCU to get them to a bowl game. Arizona and Cincinnati still left on the schedule. If they get to 8-4, that's a pretty solid bounce back after a really disappointing 2023. If you can keep Zach Besh there, if you can keep that offense rolling with Josh Hoover, could be a really fun team going into 2025 in the Big 12. But Oklahoma State cannot remotely say the same thing about. I'm not remotely sure what they're going to look like in 2025, to be totally honest. But moving down to the group of 5, we got to talk about Western Kentucky because they just keep winning football games. They keep staying in this third-tier race, I suppose, in the CFP college football race. They need a ton of things to happen for them. But at the end of the day, Caden Veldkamp made a number of not-so-great decisions in this game, and they were still able to get it done. They did have a tough time slowing down that New Mexico State running attack. 55 carries, 331 yards, and 3 touchdowns for them. So could be something that comes back to bite them, especially against a team like Liberty that's so dangerous on the ground. Definitely something to watch for, and one loss could totally change their season. But right now, they are the best team in the Conference USA as far as I'm concerned, and they're in a really good position because, honestly, if one play goes differently in that Boston College game, they lost by 1 point, they could very well be in the conversation for a CFP bid. But they got blown out by Alabama. They lost a close one to Boston College, and that's probably going to be about it. I love this Hilltoppers team, and frankly, I think they're a lot better than some people are giving them credit for. But another team that kept some hopes alive in the sort of CFP race, much more things would have to happen for UNLV, but at the end of the day, they were able to survive here and stay in the Mountain West title race. They're going to need another loss from Colorado State the rest of the way, and that's a team that's playing really good football right now. But in this game, 290 yards on the ground with Haj Malik Williams leading the way with 122 himself. Jaden Thomas had 109. The run game is really where this team is special, and then the pass game, when you have Ricky White, things tend to go really nicely in this offense. It's really, really fun to watch, and this is one that you very badly needed to escape. No doubt about that. You have San Diego State, San Jose State, and Nevada coming up. 3 relatively tough teams. Nevada should be a little bit easier, but they gave Boise State a run for their money a couple of days ago, so definitely something to watch. And then you got to just hope that Colorado State drops one. If that happens, then you are in the Mountain West Championship with a chance to avenge that one loss to Boise State earlier in the season. And then finally, we got one tonight that I wanted to break down for you guys because it is a huge one in the MAC for the future of this conference, at least this year. Western Michigan dropped last week. They fell down to that craziness that is 4-1 in that conference right now. Bowling Green has kind of asserted themselves as the best team in the conference. At least when I watch them, I tend to believe they are the best team in the conference, and they still have Miami of Ohio waiting. So they very much need this win. They very much need to stay above the fray in that conference and give themselves a really good shot at the MAC. But I think it is safe to say that the winner of this game is likely in the MAC championship. These are two teams that I would not expect to lose the rest of the way, and I do think they are very, very good, and I think it's fairly likely that the winner of this one gets in. Maybe we even get a rematch. Who knows? But I do think the winner of this game will be in that championship game, and then we'll just have to figure out the craziness around Miami of Ohio and a million other teams in that conference. But the talent on the field is going to be really fun to watch as well. You have one of the best tight ends in the country in Harold Fannin. You have Terrion Stewart running the ball for Bowling Green. You had Jaden Nixon and Jalen Buckley running the ball for Western Michigan. It's going to be a really fun game that could just outright decide the MAC the rest of the way. I'm going to take Bowling Green. I think the talent on that team, Connor Bazelak is really running the offense very efficiently. I'm going to go with Bowling Green in this one, but this is going to be a huge one and very well could just be deciding half at least of the MAC championship going forward. So going to be an incredible week coming up here, and we'll get it started tonight with some MACtion, and then we'll continue on to, well, seems to be a little bit of a low-key week, but as we all know, it's a little bit of a dangerous week whenever that happens. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about Week 11 superlatives. Some big-time wins out there, some individual performances that we got to talk about, and we'll break it down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about just all the games we just hadn't had a chance to get to throughout this week. Somehow West Virginia stays alive in the Big 12, as crazy as that sounds, but a number of things that'll happen over the next couple of weeks that will define this crazy race that we're in right now for the CFP. But let's get into some superlatives, because this is always a really fun thing to do right after the week has ended. Let's get into all of the craziness. We'll get into the biggest win of the weekend, individual performance, statement of the weekend, loser, surprise, and game of the week. So many different things that I want to break down for you guys. But let's start with the biggest win of the weekend, and you got to give love to Georgia Tech. This was a huge win for this team and this program going forward. They have a top 30 recruiting class right now. They have a group that is really, really solid that would let them take that next step forward as they have under Brent Key. They just watched all that unfold. They just watched a team just out-tough Miami. They watched a team just beat a team that is outright more talented, is outright more special, faster, bigger, stronger, whatever you want to say. They are all of those things to Georgia Tech, and you just watch the team that you're committed to still get that win. That is huge for this team. It's huge for this program, and should set up their recruiting in a really good spot this year. Indiana, I mean, nothing more really needs to be said about this win, but it's one of those wins that they badly needed. They had a ton of games early on in the season where they were handling business about as good, if not better, than 90% of the country. So they should get rewarded for that, no doubt about that. This was the game where I think everyone was looking at just a little bit worried. And it's not that Michigan, I think anyone thought was a better team than Indiana, but the physicality, the energy, and really just the Michigan of it all could play into this one. But they were able to get it done. Now they move forward to the huge one in a couple of weeks, but that could have very well just stamped their ticket to the CFP. We'll find out in the rankings tonight where exactly they sit, but definitely going to be interesting to watch the rest of the way. And then Ole Miss, this was it. No doubt about that. I mean, this was the moment that they've been waiting for really since Lane Kiffin showed up in Oxford. This is the moment that they've been waiting for. They were able to confirm that all the stuff they've been doing for the past year, it's all working. They got the players, they have the dudes, they can physically just impose their will against a team that a year ago tore you to pieces. It was 52-17 in this game a year ago. Then you come out, win 28-10, totally dominate that offensive line. That's absolutely satisfying, and it's got to feel really good for Lane Kiffin and this Ole Miss team, and they move forward as one of the teams to kind of beat in that conference as they move into possibly a CFP berth. But let's get into individual performance of the weekend. We got to start with Quinn Ewers. It was really remarkable to watch what this kid could do this past weekend, and it looks like he is fully healthy, and that's a scary thought for a lot of teams out there. But 19 for 27, 333, 5 touchdowns was really remarkable. And it's a great sign for Texas fans because that passing the ball downfield, that pushing the ball 15, 20 yards downfield had been missing. he was incredible on Saturday doing that. He hit just about everyone he needed to, and he had a drop that could have gotten probably over 400 yards and 6 touchdowns on the day. So he was absolutely remarkable and really had the performance that I think he just needed. After all the craziness the last couple of weeks, being able to get out there, have a very efficient, great performance is something that he needed and Texas definitely needed the rest of the way. And then we got to talk about this kid. 155 snaps. 155 snaps. I don't understand it. Every time that we see a new number from this kid, every time that we see that number tick up just a little bit more, it gets a little bit more crazy to me. And sometimes I've become numb to it. I see 132 and I'm like, yeah, he does 132 all the time. 155 snaps? How is that physically possible? And just for fun, he had 99 receiving yards and a touchdown. And he was plenty good on defense because no one was throwing anywhere near him. They were terrified to throw it in his direction. So the dude is remarkable. I still think it's right with him and Ashton Genty for that Heisman, and I know I'm getting some pushback there, but I remain firm that those are the two best players in the country right now. But man, it's really hard to deny this kid right about now. But Jalen Milroe the winner to me. It was a remarkable performance on the biggest stage of the weekend. 12 for 18, 109 yards passing, but 12 carries, 185 yards, and 4 scores on the ground. That's just really special. That is who he is, and it's one of those things where you realize why some people think that is the best quarterback in the country when he does stuff like that. He is absolutely incredible. And then I left out Ashton Genty at over 200 yards and 3 scores. It's insane that one doesn't even crack the top 3 for me, but that's just who he is at this point. So it'll be awesome to watch that, and obviously he's still trying to continue that Heisman run, or at least that run to New York City. Then we got to get to statement of the weekend. I'll stay with Alabama football. That was Bama football. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the show, but that was confirmation that getting Kalen DeBoer, that getting all of these guys in there, that having a lot of the turnover that you've had, and even going through some of the struggles you did early on in this season was all worth it. You have the momentum, you have the formula, you have what you need going forward the rest of the season. Obviously, it is a very, very tough thing to execute week over week. When you have your quarterback running the ball as your biggest threat, that can be an issue, no doubt about that. But at least you know that now. At least you can move forward with that formula, and then you just got to hope that the chips fall the right way. It's going to be really awesome to watch this team, and if this is the Alabama team you get the rest of the way, then they very well could win a national title. Then you got BYU. This was a huge win. And like Indiana, it was a battle to a degree that they hadn't seen really since Oklahoma State when they had to come back and win that game as well. But they're all but in the Big 12 title because of that game. This is one of those games where they very badly needed it. And now you can lose one of the next two and still be right in that thing. So I wouldn't be too worried if I was a BYU fan right now. But definitely some things you're going to have to worry about in the Big 12 title. I think you're there. I'm not going to, I'm trying not to put the cart before the horse, but as of right now, I feel pretty confident saying BYU is in the Big 12 championship. And then Colorado could be joining them there. This is a huge win for this program. I'd said it going into this game. It was the biggest game in Deion's career at Colorado. No doubt about that. It was a game where they could have confirmed themselves as the top one of the top teams in the Big 12, put themselves in a great position to possibly make the championship, possibly make the playoff. They did all of those things. It was really incredible to watch, and the team just continues to get better and better every single week. Then we'll go to the other side, the loser of the week. Georgia's got to be on here. This one was a little bit different than usual games that Georgia loses, because when you look back at some other games that Georgia has lost, there hasn't been a lot of them, but when you do look back at those games, it usually takes a remarkable offense. It usually takes a couple of really explosive plays from Jamison Williams and from Bryce Young and from a couple other people, from Ryan Williams, a lot of people to make those really, really special plays on the outside that just get those couple of big plays that you need to beat Georgia. That was not the case on Saturday. They just got beat. They got beat up front. They got beat physically, and it was not something that, frankly, I had seen since the very first year of Kirby Smart. It was very, very interesting to watch, and definitely a huge win for Ole Miss, but a huge loss for Georgia. And then their friends over there at Florida definitely had a very tough week, no doubt about that. They're in a position now where the next couple of months, they're just going to be biting their nails and hoping that everything works out. I think that's probably the best way forward. Now, if you were able to beat LSU this upcoming weekend, get to a bowl game, everything will feel a little bit better, no doubt about that. But you're in a precarious position. I'll just leave it at that for the time being, and it'll be interesting to watch how the rest of this unfolds, but I can't imagine any Florida fan will feel safe until they start playing football next season, and then a whole new type of anxiety washes over you. But finally, LSU. LSU is in a really, really bad spot. If they won this weekend, their path to the SEC playoff was as clear as really anyone in the conference. Their path to the CFP was very, very clear as well. Now they're in a really weird spot. Now they essentially just have to win out, have to get a couple of things to break their way, have to get to Atlanta, and have to win that game if they want to be in the playoff at this point. So a really tough one, and now you got a lot of fans looking around wondering if Brian Kelly's the guy. So a lot of things going on in Baton Rouge. I think it's going to be a lot better in 2025, I'll be totally honest, but as of right now, this one just hurts. No two ways about that. Then the surprise of the week, the Georgia Tech D-line dominance was pretty remarkable. And it's not that Miami is the best run blocking team in the country, and to be fair, in the pass blocking, I think they were fine. There were a lot of coverage sacks and things of that nature, but at the end of the day, you are bigger than these guys, you are stronger than these guys, you are more athletic than these guys, you are longer than these. You should have every ability to push these guys around. That is what you should be able to do to a team like Georgia Tech, to a team like Duke, to a team like Cal. You should just be able to impose your will, and for whatever reason, they just can't. They can pass block, no two ways about that. They are a very good offensive lineman pass blocking. For whatever reason, they can't impose their will, and if they could this weekend, they would be in a much better position going forward, but it's something they're going to have to deal with. If they can't run the ball consistently and it's just Cam Ward having to save you every single game, a team like SMU can get after you. So it's going to be really interesting to watch the rest of the way, but the way Georgia Tech's D-line played this game, I wasn't surprised that they were good. Was more surprised that Miami struggled the way that they did, because just physically, they shouldn't have the way that they did. The other thing is more undefeated teams not falling. I'll be totally honest. I was expecting a couple of these teams to go down, and obviously Indiana and BYU are the two main examples here. Indiana escaped just a little bit here. Michigan was not able to get anything going offensively late in this one. For BYU, there were a couple of things that led to that one. A call that a lot of people are angry about. I do think it was holding, but the Utah AD definitely didn't. But it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold, and they stay alive for one more week, and that's kind of the goal at this point. For these two teams, and really every undefeated team around the country, just stay alive for as long as you can, and you'll probably be in a really good spot going down the stretch to get into the CFP. And then I wanted to shout out the Bama back end. This was a big surprise to me because when I looked at this game, just objectively, I was thinking very aggressive defense, likes to get after the quarterback, which means they like to play a lot of man coverage on the back end, like to make sure that they're, just locking up guys one-on-one. That's kind of Garrett Nussmeier's wheelhouse. If you're going to get after him, if you're going to give him one-on-one coverage, he's going to take it, and usually he's going to tear you apart. He had 2 picks, and it was under 6 yards on yards per attempt in this game. So it was not pretty in the LSU pass game, and it was a lot to do with his Alabama pass rush, but really impressive stuff from this back end. I still have some issues with them. I still have some worries with them as they go into the playoff and possibly into the SEC title against a team like Texas or against a team like Tennessee that they played a little bit ago. It'll be interesting to watch, but at the end of the day, a huge one for them this weekend, and definitely the confidence for that team is just skyrocketing right now. And then the game of the week. And frankly, it's going to be a lot of finishes of the week, not so much games of the week, because there weren't great games just across the board entirely through 4 quarters. But the finish of the Georgia Tech Miami game was really fun, and really kind of the entire game in this one was just weird and fun because you had weird quarterback dynamics with Georgia Tech. You had some big-time plays to start and end this game. You had a crazy finish where it felt like Miami was going to make their way back into the game, but couldn't quite get that magic this time. And then you had a field storming, just for good measure. You had a lot of fun in this game, and it was one of those that whenever you get an upset, it's always really fun. That one felt a little bit more special because of the dynamics around Georgia Tech and Miami, because of the dynamics really just around that Georgia Tech program. Felt like that one was a little bit more special to that crowd than usual. But BYU Utah, again, another finish that was really, really fun. The game itself was a little bit monotonous at times, but at the end of the day, BYU being able to drive down, get a little bit of controversy involved in that, but be able to drive down, kick a game-winning field goal, awesome moment. In a rivalry game on the road, made for some great theatrics after the game, and it was a really, really fun game, and one of those where whenever you have the Holy War, you're really excited about it. This one definitely delivered in a big way. And then the finish in the Missouri-Oklahoma game just by itself. The last 4 minutes of that game forward were some of the craziest football that I've ever seen in my life. You had 4 touchdowns in the final 4 minutes, including 2 fumble returns, 4 touchdowns, and the last one that got Miami the win. It was absolutely insane. You had Theo Weiss running around the field talking a little bit of trash to his former team. It was all good energy. Absolutely loved it, and this is a rivalry game that we're getting back in the SEC, and it's getting off to a pretty good start, and I think it's going to be a really fun one to watch the rest of the way. But it was a crazy week, and I think a lot of people really showed out that individual performance was really hard to give out, frankly, because I think I could have gone with John Mateer, had a great game. Ashton Genty obviously had an awesome one. There are so many players around the country. That Jahad Campbell was incredible in that Alabama game, so a lot of people that definitely deserve some recognition there, but had to narrow it down to those 3 guys, so I ended up doing that. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we got to get in my top 15 for this upcoming week because a lot of movement. A couple of teams fell out of the top 10 after this past weekend. They fell quite a ways out of the top 10 after this past weekend, and a couple others that are just kind of lurking around in some interesting positions, to say the least. But I'll break it down right after this. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into some of the different superlatives for this past weekend. I think the game of the week was really just that last 4 minutes in the Missouri-Oklahoma game. I'll be totally honest with you guys. It was absolutely insane and was what college football is about. But let's get into this. I'll be totally honest. It's been one that I've been kind of dreading, really, since all of those games started to go down on Saturday. I got very, very confused about what this was going to be. But I feel pretty good about the 15 that I have here. Definitely some movement up top, some movement of some teams all the way down, and we'll break that down right now. But Boise State stays pat at 15. I'm not necessarily going to move them really the rest of the year. If they keep handling business, if they keep doing their thing, unless if Army were to win this weekend, then some things would, or in 2 weeks, if they were to win, some things would change. But at the end of the day, right now, Boise State's handling business, handled a little bit of a scare this past weekend against Nevada, but they win out, they win their schedule, and Army loses to Notre Dame. They're in, no doubt about that. So they stay put at 15, nothing really special there. But A&M jumps back in at 14. This is a team that really just jumps back in on the basis of other teams losing, honestly, but they are a team that can still make the CFP. They got to probably win out if they slip even once throughout the way, even if they beat Texas at the end of the year. I think they're in a really tough spot to make the CFP. So they're in one of those tightrope spots of sorts, and without Le'Veon Moss, it got a little bit tighter. It'll be interesting to watch what this team is about, but really with just a couple of those teams losing that were right around this area, they find their way into it, where I think LSU was last week, actually. Miami at 13. This was a team that, frankly, I was just kind of waiting for this to happen. I think they're a good team. I think they have every ability to win out the rest of the way, win the ACC, and get into the CFP. I don't think that would make them a top 10 team in the country. I think they are a very good team. I think they're a very capable team, and especially with Cam Ward at quarterback, things get really interesting in a hurry, obviously. But a lot of the issues that they've been having over the last 5 weeks just came back to bite them in this one. So it's not like this team is totally different or they're losing a game that we didn't see this coming or anything like that. this is a team that was flawed, and we knew they were flawed, and it officially got exposed. So I'm a little bit worried about them going forward. If they were to totally bounce back, make the ACC title, then obviously my opinion would go up throughout that time, and I still have a very high opinion of this team. It was just one of those things where it'd been kind of building up. It'd be kind of being one of those things where, I'm keeping you at 4 for the time being, but the second that something goes wrong, the second that you lose, you're probably going to drop quite a ways, and that's exactly what happened this week. They can work their way back up, but right now, I would have them on the outside of the CFP looking in. Then you got Georgia at 12. Georgia's a flawed team. There's no two ways about that. The good news for them is pretty much everyone is flawed, including the team that's coming to Athens here in a second in Tennessee. So it's going to be interesting to watch what this team is the rest of the way. If you can't get that offensive line figured out, you're not going to be a good team. Just plain and simple, you are not going to be able to beat Tennessee. You are not going to be able to get to the CFP. You're not going to be able to win games once you're there. So a lot of stuff comes down to this weekend. If they lose this weekend, then everything goes awry, and you have a lot of questions around the Georgia Bulldogs, not only this year, but probably going forward. But as of right now, they're still a very good team, still a very talented team, but some issues there that if they're not fixed by this weekend, you're going to have a defensive line that's going to eat you for dinner again. But we'll see what happens, and they could very well be out of the top 15 this time next week. But SMU at 11, I feel really good about this team. They dropped just a little bit because others got some huge wins, but they're a really, really good team with Kevin Jennings pushing all the buttons. They have the ability to score with just about anyone. They also have a defensive line that's a lot meaner than people give them credit for with Jaden Roberts. I'm blanking on his name right now. I very much apologize. I believe it's Jaden Roberts, but very talented player nonetheless, and someone that definitely can blow up some games for them. So they dropped just a little bit here, but nothing to do with them, more to do with a couple other teams' wins. BYU drops just a little bit to number 10 here, and the issues are very real for this team. They keep winning, so I'm not dropping them too far by any means, but I'm getting more and more worried about this team's ability to win the conference championship against a team like Colorado or against a team like Iowa State or Kansas State. I don't necessarily think I would love their odds. Obviously, they did beat Kansas State earlier in the year. If you rewatch that game, it's not quite as straightforward as you would have liked it to be for BYU. There are quite a few things that went their way in that game. I can't imagine that's going to happen again if they were to rematch. But obviously, you keep winning your games. You stay in the hunt. You're the best team in the Big 12 right now. No question. I thought about putting Colorado in this top 15, but shied away just a little bit. They're probably my 16 if I'm being totally honest. But Notre Dame at 9. I think they move up just a little bit more. Another elite performance from this team in a game where you probably should have had an elite performance. Now, it's going to get a little bit harder every single week. You're only 3 weeks from the finish line. You got Virginia, you got Army, you got USC. Those are 3 teams that you should beat. There are also 3 teams that can beat you on any given Saturday. So you're going to have to be very careful. And a team that, if that pass game can still hold up even when their run game gets stopped, which is my big worry for them, they're going to be really dangerous down the stretch. If the run game gets stopped by one of the elite teams that they will play in the playoff possibly, I think things could go awry in a hurry. But right now, they're in the CFP. They're rolling right along, and if they win out, they will be there. Ole Miss at 8, a huge, huge win this past weekend. It was really just a mission that started when they lost to Georgia last year. Lane Kiffin knew that this was not going to be the team that takes them to the next level. He wanted to go get players that could take them there, and man, did they. That D-line was absolutely incredible. Princely Emmanuel and Walter Nolan, all of the guys they brought in were just absolutely incredible on Saturday, and it made everything worth it from this last little bit. Obviously, you got to win the next 2 games, but as of right now, they're going into their bye week feeling really good about where they sit. Alabama at 7, and I really debated Alabama Ole Miss in these 2 spots, but Alabama seems to have found their level. It seems to have found their formula, found who they are, found the way they want to go about business. And that's a scary thought for just about everyone else, because that means Kalen DeBoer can really sink his teeth into an offensive game plan where he knows what to do, where he knows what the strengths are, where he knows where he can attack, and he's one of the best play callers in the entire country. He's one of the best schemers in the entire country, not the play caller over there, to be fair. But it's going to be really interesting to watch, and if they run the ball and play defense that way, this is a national championship caliber team. Then you got Penn State at 6, and Penn State was able to bounce back in a huge way this past weekend. Feel pretty good about them going forward. There was a little bit of worry for me last weekend. Frankly, the worry still stands. I really won't know exactly what this team is until they play, possibly in a playoff game. But as of right now, they're in a really, really good spot. They got to win out. They got to win a playoff game, but they're rolling right along, and they should be able to, at the very least, make the playoff and then see what happens from there. Indiana makes their introduction into the top 5. They move up just a little bit, but not quite as much as they possibly could have. The physicality of Michigan got to them. That was very, very clear. They could not run the ball, and it really hurt this offense. You got maybe a more physical group going in Ohio State in a couple of weeks. So I'm getting a little bit worried. I hate to say it, but I'm getting a little bit worried that an 11-1 Indiana is going to be on the outside looking in. I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that does not happen, because I do not think that should happen. But at the end of the day, if they get blown out by 21 points to Ohio State, things get really interesting for this Indiana team in a hurry. Tennessee at 4. This is a team that feels like they have found it. Now, Nico did go down in this game, had a little bit of a concussion. Feels like he should be ready to go for that Georgia game. So if he wasn't, then probably would be a little bit lower on this. But they were able to find the deep passing game. They hit a couple of deep shots, and frankly, that's all you need. You don't need, to hit 30-yard passes 5 times in a game. You don't need to have 60-yard touchdowns 4 times. You just need to get the defense a couple of times. You need to hit those couple of 60-yard bombs, those 1 or 2 60-yard bombs, and then your run game is going to take you to victory. Your run game and your defense is what you are. But those couple of big-time pass plays really open things up, and if they can get them this weekend, then I think they can very well win that game. It's going to be really fun to watch, and Tennessee right now feels like a team that is just starting to roll downhill, if I'm being honest. Texas at 3. I think Texas looked like the team that they looked like in Michigan in week 2 this week, which is absolutely massive. Florida, obviously not the world beater team that a lot of teams really want Texas to play right about now, but at the end of the day, a big time win gets them right where they need to be, and if that downfield passing game continues, then this is a team that absolutely can win a national title and get right back on track and be just one of the most lethal offenses the rest of the way. Still some questions, and would love to see it again this upcoming weekend against Arkansas, but as of right now, this team is rolling in, looks downright terrifying offensively. Ohio State at 2. They continue to roll along, got a huge win over Purdue this past weekend, and Will Howard looks a lot more comfortable. And the thing is, that's just what it is. That's what it comes down to. They go as far as Will Howard will take them. That's just about it. If they can get a ton of really good play out of Will Howard the rest of the way, they can beat Michigan, they can beat Indiana, they can win the Big Ten championship, and they can go on to win a national title. If a couple of those mistakes keep popping up pretty much every game, then I find it very unlikely that they're going to be able to win all of the games that they need to. So it's going to be interesting to watch this team down the stretch, but as of right now, it feels like they're rounding into form, and that's a terrifying thought for just about anyone in the country, including the number 1 team in the country. Oregon is the best team in the country. I have very little doubt saying that. They have kind of asserted that over the last couple of weekends while everyone else has been, punching each other in the face. Oregon's been rolling right along. They've been kind of just dodging everything and having just a grand old time up there in the Pacific Northwest. But obviously, the point still stands that this could fall apart pretty quickly. If they lose one game and things go awry and, they lose the Big Ten championship, then they're in a weird spot going into the CFP. But as of right now, it looks like they're going to go undefeated, possibly get a rematch with Ohio State in that title game, and then maybe be the number 1 seed as we head into the CFP. So that's the best team in the country, no doubt in my mind. The top 15 for me had quite a few changes. I dropped Miami quite a ways just because I'd been worried about this, and I didn't feel great about them being at 4 before. Now that they lost, I had to drop them quite a ways. For Georgia, kind of the same thing. They had the worries, they had the issues on their offense, but they were able to win games until they weren't, and then you got to drop them quite a ways. So those teams take a hit. Obviously, they got plenty of time to get back up. Georgia has a huge one this weekend that would probably bounce them right back up into the top 10. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this unfolds, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will be back tomorrow to react to those CFP rankings and start those breakdowns for Week 12.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.